agree with my colleague Thara. Well, we do need to go beyond just cardiometabolic factors. Those are important. There is no denying them. But I think there's some more pernicious social risk factors that, in fact, probably also contribute to premature mortality. I want to end by suggesting to you then what might be, at least in the view of the Commission, perhaps a different way of thinking about making the case that people with serious mental illness must not die younger than anyone else in their community. We need to recognize the limit of evidence in changing hearts and minds. We need to reframe this appalling and unacceptable fact as a moral outrage, no less an insult to our humanity than the arguments in the mid-90s by many of our own colleagues, economists, public health academics, and so on, who said millions of Africans should be left to die simply because their country's health systems were too weak and the drugs were unaffordable. And to do so, I think we are going to have to adopt a moral, rights-based approach. I don't genuinely believe that scientific evidence is going to make all that big of a difference. It's certainly made very little difference in Africa. I think we are going to have to work with activists, particularly people living with mental illness, and empower them to be here on stage instead of myself, to actually speak for themselves. We're going to have to get them into the rooms of governments, of government leaders, to make the case that they have the same rights as anyone else in their community. And in fact, in the Commission, we have suggested there are, of course, many other barriers to improving access to mental health care, and we've suggested reframing mental health in 3 different ways, and one of the ways is to adopt a rights-based approach. We've called for 3 different kinds of rights to be realized for everyone. The first is the right to be protected from harms to one's mental health. That's very aspirational, of course. But the other 2 rights are more practical and reflect very much the conversations today and tomorrow. They are the right to care, not just treatment, because people with serious mental illness most often need care. They don't always need biomedical treatment. And very importantly, linked to that right, the right to choose the care that they receive, not to be told what care they should receive, but to be supported in making the decision on what care they can receive. And finally, the right to freedom and dignity, sadly still a right that is denied to countless thousands around the world. I want to end with a thought experiment. I know most of us here are mental health professionals, and I want you to just think about why you became what you are today. Let's be true to ourselves. None of us chose this field because it's a sexy field. It's definitely not, right? We didn't choose this field because we're going to live in a very expensive penthouse. This is not glamorous. We don't have magic bullets like vaccines and stents to impress our neighbors. We took up this field, in my mind, and certainly I did, because it offended our humanity to witness the cruel, degrading, and unjust way in which people with serious mental illness have been treated across time and across societies. It was a horrific discovery for me when I learned that when the Nazis were developing gas chambers, the first community they actually tested them on were people with serious mental illness. It remains a horrific fact that a large proportion of the people who sleep on the streets of this city of unimaginable wealth are people with serious mental illness. It remains a horrific fact that there are more people in this country with serious mental illness in prison than are in any kind of a caring institution. It remains a fact that about 1/3 of all the people who've been lynched in India over the last year were people with intellectual disabilities or a serious mental illness. And it remains a fact that most people in the developing world who are in institutions live in institutions in the most appalling conditions of neglect, torture, and human rights abuses. To use a phrase coined by my colleague Arthur Kleinman, this is surely a failure of humanity, and no amount of science is going to change that. It is this humanity, I believe, that we must appeal to if we are really going to be able to successfully address this historic global injustice. Thank you very much. I think it's time for reception.